Okay, good morning, everyone. It is such a pleasure to be here this morning and to indeed meet all of you in person. Today's conversation is about change management. This morning, you've heard a lot about the performance side of the business. Today, I come to you to talk to you about the second side, the softer side, or as some would say, the power side of the business. My name is Suchita Prasad. I am a change management and leadership expert with McKinsey and Company, and absolutely a pleasure to be here this morning. I won't belabor the first point, right? COVID has been here. COVID has sparked many trends. McKinsey Global Institute is our research body and think tank, and it's discovered three big themes that will stay long after the health pandemic has subsided. There is an impact on remote teams, on virtual meetings, on travel, right? We see, of course, that work from home has gone up. We see that business travel by 2030, by the way, there is a slight dip from pre-pandemic levels. Leisure travel, we expect, or at least research indicates, will come back to pre-pandemic levels. So this was the first set of trends that MGI found. The second was about operating model changes. Right? E-commerce penetration has gone up, restaurant delivery, online groceries. These are things that we're all users of. The world has changed quite significantly. And lastly, impact of automation. I cannot stress this enough. Even before the pandemic hit, we had been already talking to companies about automation, about digitalization, and now that trend is only accelerated. But what does it mean, right? And here are three examples of how companies have been reimagined. Specifically in your business, in your industry, I picked out three examples that I heard of and I found exciting. By the way, in the lounge that I visited this morning, I see this come to life already. I see that planning has become highly personalized. I recently traveled to Bangkok, and I had a very amazing experience right from getting off at the airport to getting into a car with a very different lane, very, very specific and suited to my needs. So planning, completely customized. Second, there are examples of how companies are reimagining local tours. In fact, I saw an amazing example in Ashlin's presentation of how Singapore's doing a lot to customize travel, create local tours. And then lastly, of course, we're seeing very innovative ways of travel and technology. What does it mean? There are unmanned services. There was facial recognition everywhere. For an organizational and change expert, I find this fascinating because at this time, there's an opportunity to reframe what we have. And there's a time to reimagine where we work, how we work, what skills we need, and most importantly, what culture we bring to our teams. Because at McKinsey, for us, change is linked to culture. Change is critical to business performance. Culture is critical to business performance. And especially in COVID, and I'll call out three things about why it's important. One, culture is not soft. Culture correlates to performance. In all the research that we've done over the last few years, we've seen that companies that invest in this actually have a significant return on shareholder value, right? So significant TRS returns. Culture is key to solving change management. And finally, it's very hard to replicate. It can be a key differentiating factor for all of you. And here is, over the last few years, we've also spoken particularly to 200 change leaders who've been driving this work in their organizations. And here are things we heard. We heard that change programs and transformations have actually gone up, right? Speed is the new imperative. Everyone wants things done today, this minute. We have no time to wait for culture to happen. Organizations are listening more. Listening apps have come up, right? Change leaders are experiencing a variety of emotions, and communication is important. Communication that actually addresses the fatigue, that addresses the time and resource constraints that we have, that allows us to actually remove these blockers to performance. Despite this, and you all know this, most change efforts do fail. 70% of change efforts fail. And if it's often because we don't address the mindsets that are underlying all of these change efforts. Most often, people give resources, people give budgets to our initiative, but unless we tackle the mindsets and our behaviors, culture will not change, will not move. Now, in McKinsey, we often propose using the influence model as a comprehensive model for change. And I invite you to just walk with me on a journey through these 4 levers. So, people will change behaviors if A, they understand change. So on the top right corner, you see what's called the fostering, understanding, and conviction bucket. Do your teams really understand what is changing? Why do they need to change, and what does it look like? Because that often is underrepresented in efforts. So can we do more about increasing understanding of change? Once that's done, people actually start to change themselves. This role modeling, there is senior leadership role modeling, influence leaders that can actually be brought together to lead change on the ground. But this also is not enough. Most often this is done. The last 2 buckets are quite critical. How do we enable the momentum? And there are 2 things you can do. One lever to pull is a reward mechanism. Do we reward people for change? Do we remove blockers? Are there KPIs linked to it? Are there performance metrics that are linked to it? And then finally is developing of skills, developing of mindsets around change. And of course, in the last few weeks and months, there's been a focus on reskilling initiatives. There's been a focus around IT, tech adoption. And so the question for all of you is, of these 4, how many do you use? Research shows us that the more we use all 4 in tandem, the higher the chances of change adoption in your company. Now, let me give you a bit more fact basis on what does this look like. And you'll see across each of these 4, you'll see a significant change, a significant improvement if we've adopted these factors. But by far, the 2 factors to call out are the rewarded bucket. So what do you do to incentivize people? And then most importantly, the role modeling bucket. How do you show up? How do you demonstrate this change? So what we're going to do now is I'm going to spend just a few more minutes talking to you about 2 buckets in specific. I'm actually not talking about rewards, because in our experience, a lot of teams are getting that right. I will talk to you this morning about how do you build compelling change stories. And in different presentations, we've heard about the importance of storytelling, the importance of making sure our travel agents, our tour guides know how to tell their stories and narratives better. So I'll talk to you a little bit about best practices in this understanding and storytelling. And the second I'll talk to you about is the reskilling piece. And we'll share some research on what are the skills that are needed for the future. What do you and I have to do to be better prepared? So let's jump in. The first one is change management or storytelling. Mr. Keith referred to it this morning. Stephen referred to it this morning. Ashlyn referred to it. My presenters before referred to it as well. Storytelling is key. The more you can tell compelling narratives, the more powerfully your message lands. Unfortunately, it doesn't have the success it should have. It can be a huge differentiator. And you'll see at the bottom, the big thing that makes a difference is narration. How do you tell your story? Our research shows that there are 6 things you need to do to tell stories well. 6 things. And by the way, most people do 2 or 3. So here's the one thing you take away today is when you tell a story, make sure you touch upon each of these 6 elements. And what are they? One is, what is our aspiration? Where are we going in the future? What is it that we're looking to do? What is our big aspiration? What is our mission? What is our measure of success? What does it feel like? So not a very abstract view, but make it tangible. Second, what will be the effort, right? And by the way, I'll talk to this. This is a secret weapon we have called the 5 sources of meaning. I'll talk to you about what those are, but really addressing 5 sources of meaning. Our research shows that different people actually get influenced by different things. So 5 sources of meaning, but I'll come back to that. Third is, so, okay, you know where you're going, you know why you want to get there. Let's talk about where are we today? Where are we not just performance-wise, but health-wise? And when I say health, I mean culture. For us, health is synonymous with culture, right? How are we doing on the hard things? How are we doing on the soft things, really? How are we feeling about wellness? How are we feeling about talent, about attrition, engagement? If you don't build the health of the business, you won't go very far. So where are we today? Now you know where you are, where you're trying to get to, where you are, what's the gap, and how will we achieve it? Number 5 is, what do I therefore commit to do to achieve this gap? And 6th, and very importantly, what are my expectations of all of you on this journey? A change story is compelling if it meets all of these, because it makes it personal. Now, I told you a little while earlier about the 5 sources of meaning, right? And this is our big tip. We find that when we address organizations, when CEOs address town halls, when you address your teams, when you address smaller groups, different people get motivated by different things. And often, in a group, about 20% of people get attracted by each of these 5 elements. There's a group of people that gets attracted to the impact we would have on society. What does this mean for the big picture? Very macro thinkers. At the next level, it's about the company. What does this mean for you and me, for the company that I serve? For the third, it's about, all right, the customer. The company exists to serve the customer. What does it mean for the customer? Number 4 is about team experiences, right? And number 5 is about, what does it mean for me? Now let's take an example. And again, I'll refer to something that Mr. Steve talked about, and in fact, Mr. Keith as well talked about. It's about rejuvenating products this morning. You talked about how it's important for all of us to think about new products, right? One narrative is it's important to bring in new products because, we respond to what the customer wants. And if we respond to what the customer wants, it builds trust, it builds loyalty. And that ultimately will impact bottom line. And that's why it's important. That is a change story. You've talked about customer, you've talked about your company. You've hit 2 out of these 5. That's wonderful. But only 2. Let me offer you a slightly different narrative, which is, I might say, here's how it impacts the customer, here's how it impacts the company. This is an opportunity for us to reskill. This is a chance for us to work together, create new products, engage in entrepreneurialism. This is a chance for us to increase and upskill ourselves to be future-proof. There is about 20% people who will respond to that narrative of it being about what's in it for me, and whether it's myself or my teams, but what's in it for me. And yet, if you had to take it another level higher, and this is what I saw done so masterfully this morning, and I'm looking at the words here, which is, if we all come together, if we serve our customers better, that will of course impact bottom line. But it will also give us a chance to come together, upskill ourselves, be future-proof. But collectively, that will have an impact on Singapore. That will have an impact to create a stronger and more resilient Singapore. And you see, that narrative links everyone and touches everyone quite differently. And so I'll leave this with you, which is just a recap for this section, which is communications, compelling communications and storytelling is absolutely critical to success. Every time you communicate, think about 6 things, 6 components of change stories. And more specifically, think about 5 sources of meaning to tailor your messaging to audiences. So that was step 1, which is the first deep dive around the importance of communication. Let us talk to you a little bit about the second half, about talent. It is true that all of us are facing a very different landscape. This is true for everyone in this room today. And I want to take a few moments to paint you a picture of what the world will look like in 2030. Again, I'm going to leverage some of the work that MGI, which is our think tank, has done. And here's what the picture looks like. It's a little bit of a complicated slide, but bear with me. So what MGI did is on the left-hand side, it basically looked at all the work that's being done in the world today, all the work, right? And so you'll see there's physical and manual work, there's cognitive work, there's social, emotional, and technological work. So they basically took all the work, categorized it, and said, how many hours are people spending on this work? Then, using a lot of probability analysis, data analysis, machine learning, they pegged this whole value for 2030. What does this look like in 2030? And you see the change, actually, or the bar chart in the middle, tells you how things are changing, how capabilities are changing. And again, this is a very critical insight for all of us in this room, because we see that physical and manual labor always been on the decline, no surprises there. But basic cognitive skills will go away, because this will all be automated, right? We see automation potential of between 5 to 60% across industries, bar none. So this will go away. The two things that we need to do to be best prepared for the future are to invest in A, technological skills. And I heard a lot about that this morning. And in particular, there's amazing efforts going on to upskill people on, let's say, is it cognitive skills, data analysis, there's, how do you integrate with technology, how do you link with Facebook, Twitter, how do you do customer segmentation, all of that, absolutely the right things to do. This will grow over time. And so for each of us, if we don't know what cloud is, if we don't know what technology is, AI is, crypto, Bitcoin, these are things that will become more and more a part of our vocabulary, and I encourage you to get better acquainted with this. But interestingly for me in this research, the thing that's changed is the second last line, which is the social and emotional skills. In the future, we're seeing a lot of work which is being automated out, but the true differentiator of talent are social and emotional skills. Empathy, managing ambiguity. And actually, this is what it's looking like. The earlier page was all about skills. This page is about mindsets. What do you and I need to do to be better prepared is not just focus on IQ, which is at the skill level, not just focus on EQ, which is often also talked about. We often talked about EQ. There have been lots of books that have been published. But now is the age of AQ. We don't know what the world will bring in the future. We don't know what's going to come next month, how things will change going forward. What can we do? What can you and I do to be better prepared is to develop our AQ muscle, right? And this is becoming a critical skill. This is things like, how do I deal with ambiguity? How do I deal with change? How do I make sure I embark on lifelong learning? How do I have a growth mindset about learning? And that itself will be the key differentiator. Now, by the way, I did hear today already, we've done this really successfully in the past, right? We have seen multiple initiatives, multiple funds that have been offered in the past to continue to build our EQ, AQ, and IQ. However, there are a few things companies can do. I was very, very heartened to hear about, in fact, the NTUC, the Niang Poly setups by both the organizations, STB and NATAS, but really leverage that, make the most of it, right? What can you do? You can look at upskilling opportunities. You can think about segmentation. People need to know how to attract new customers, how to innovate, how to create new products. People need to think about agile. What are design thinking journeys? What are the points at which customers now will interact differently with you? Your people, your teams, all of you, all of us in this room need to embrace this so we can be best prepared to take account of the change that's coming our way. And so with that, I'll pause here again. Recap for this section is change is coming our way. We need to think about three things, not just the IQ and EQ skills, but the mindset of adaptability. And so with that, again, thank you for having me here today. I'm very happy to answer any questions that you might have about the presentation.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have the Slido that's right on the screen, and you can join us also at the website, which is slido.com, with the code 602569, both to our online viewers as well. If you have got any questions for Suchita, she'll be here with us for the next 5-10 minutes to take on any questions pertaining to what she has shared earlier on change management during these disruptive times, talking about culture, talking about a team. I think there's a lot to go on. I think they are just probably trying to digest and wrap together how this would influence their organization. So here we have.
Wonderful. I'm just going to wait for a minute to see if there are any common themes, and then we can start to tackle some of these questions together. Okay, maybe we start with maybe I'll combine the first question and a little bit the third question. Okay, so let's start with that, right? What are some quick wins to help staff adapt to changes? Often we're asked, what are quick wins that others can do? And my humble reaction to this is change must start from ourselves. And particularly, this is research backed, not just what I say. We know that the biggest differentiator in change is how you show up, how leaders show up in their teams. So if you're looking to make a change in your teams, role model the change. So what are some quick wins you can do if you want them, for example, to speak to customers better, to understand their mindsets, to innovate new products? Roll up your sleeves. Our recommendation is to role model the change. Once in a week, set up meetings where you actually meet with customers. Make customer segmentation or customer understanding a priority for you. Put that in your list of priorities and agenda for the week, and you'll actually see change percolate over time. Role modeling is the first and most important bucket, but like I said, it's not enough. You need to do all four things to get going, but really leading it from the top, particularly in COVID periods, is quite important. Okay, I'm missing the questions, but all right, let's look at these two. Staff often shelve training plans due to work and personal commitments. What can I do to help encourage my staff to reskill and upskill themselves? Look, I believe that there are multiple stakeholders that are needed for change to happen. The individual themselves need to have intrinsic motivation. The companies themselves have to create the time and space. Often we're all doing multiple jobs today, not one and a half, two jobs, and then training is something that's just done on top. You do it earlier it used to be Friday afternoon trainings. Now it's 11 p.m. or weekend trainings that are needed. It's not going to help if it's an add-on. Our recommendation is to create Fridays or Thursdays for training. The two initiatives I would recommend are, one, to have deep dive days. So McKinsey has deep work days, McKinsey has set up, and this is an example from ourselves. We take our own advice. We have set up every alternate Wednesday in a month, so 2 Wednesdays a month, as deep work days. We don't have any meetings on that day. People are encouraged to just spend the day on learning, on just not even just doing work, but just deep work, right? Deep work, deep learning, deep thinking. But this is not just a McKinsey phenomenon. Companies like Google, companies like Amazon, AWS have all instituted some form of company-wide trainings. So if you're trying to do this at an individual level, it can be quite challenging. So number one, the first example I said is create space in the system for deep work. The second is a more long-term view, which is we often encourage people to think about micro-credentialing and training. So we have tie-ups, and I heard today tie-ups with several academic institutions, training institutions. Encourage people and reward them for this training, for micro-credentialing. Create the space for them to broaden their careers. At a client that I serve, we've created a whole new set of career streams You can switch, you can reskill pathways, but you need to really get those micro-credentials, and then you can go and join a more digital native pathway. So think about infrastructure help, micro-credentialing, training, recognition of these training programs as a way to reward people for really continuing to take on training. How do I handle old staff who have a lot of experience but a lot more resistant to change? There is no secret bullet to change. Everything that I can tell you will stay with the academic realm till you make it real. Often the way we think about change is to segment people into 4 categories, right? When you're embarking on a change initiative, think about, and we do this, we take a technology curve, you know, how in a technology curve there are some that are adopters of change. That's the first bucket. There are some in the middle that are reluctant to change, so we call them the crew, right? Like the middle bucket of people who kind of want to wait and watch where it's going. And then there are some people that are resistant to change. It's a reality of every change effort. You will have these 3 categories. There is a twofold approach sometimes to managing change. One is get the adopters on your side as soon as you can. Identify who these adopters are. Some might be millennials, some might be some of these more experienced workforce. And actually you'll find that some of the more experienced workforce tend to embrace change because they see they've lived through changes in the past and there's a little less resistance in some pockets. So the first thing, bring these people on board. Let them be the influencers. Let them really lead this change from the front. The second and more critical thing is identify the 2 or 3 people who are real serious blockers. A lot of leaders tell us that often addressing them head on, talking to them very openly, and having an explicit conversation makes all the difference. Because A, it allows you to speak and address the negativity, but also it sends a message to the others that you as a leader are not shying away from these tough messages. So bring on the adopters and absolutely immediately take on some of these, I see them as old-timers, old staff, but I would describe them more broadly as people who are resisting change. And try this 2-pronged strategy at least for a quick win. But this is a long-term effort. You would have to work, show wins, and show success for this to be sustained over time. Earlier, you mentioned with tech advancement and how Bitcoin or crypto may evolve tourism businesses. Look, I think this is a question broader than just for tourism. Bitcoin, crypto, online payments, DeFi, these are all trends that will impact how all of us are going to be working. For example, in the future, there is a world in which payments are all going to, and this is an extreme scenario, but you can draw a different analysis for how the way we work has changed. You might create a system where people go into hotels, you know, I know the startup that's working to go into hotels. There's absolutely, you know, you don't, it has face recognition. You go in, you can actually identify all your priorities, all your preferences. It can be a contactless experience. Payment for some of these might be done in different forms in the future. Credit cards are, you know, are evolving. A lot of these companies are thinking about what's next, and some of these trends impact that. All of these trends will impact how we operate in the future. And so as we start at the cusp of all of these technologies, my ask to all of us is we stay ahead of it. What can we learn from these new trends? What can we do to move forward with them would be a recommendation for how to handle the change much better. Super. Do we have more time? The younger generation staff tends to work for higher pay with lesser labor work compared to the older generation staff. How do we motivate them? You're asking me really tough questions because some of these are even outside of the remit of change. What you're asking me are true leadership questions. You're asking me, how do I lead in a world where I have different sets of people that are motivated completely differently and who show up very differently? It is true that millennials tend to have this reputation for wanting, where do you go? And I don't know what the exact words were, but the older generation, which tends to want to work longer hours, which tends to want different pay structures, whereas the younger generation seems to be more motivated by more holistic jobs. They want recognition, they want praise, they want to be, they want promotion at every 2 years. There are some archetypes that we've built up around our workforce. While these archetypes might or might not be true, the reality is there's no one size fits all when it comes to motivation. All the studies that we've done have shown us that extrinsic motivation after a while doesn't hold. Meaning there is a certain baseline hygiene that's needed for performance, for pay, for some of these performance management measures. But true motivation always comes by rewards and recognitions that are not external. So reward and recognition programs, really stepping up, recognizing people's performance, giving them opportunities to progress, real mentorship, real leadership opportunities. These are things that over time will stand heads and shoulders above a baseline of pay, mind you. But we have to really think about how to motivate people by creating opportunities for them to be successful. That is the mark of a true leader, and that is what we're hoping and working with a lot of our clients on developing.
Thank you very